Good evening, everyone. I was suitably awed on the way down by the scenery. It helped that there was no rain, but it's absolutely a gorgeous part of the world to be coming to on a fine evening. And thank you very much for coming along and joining us here. I'm a teacher. That's my full-time profession. I also write for the Irish Times and the Irish Catholic, and along with my husband who's sitting over there, a mother of 4, 2 young adults and 2 teenagers. And I think this is a very important moment for our country, and a very, very important decision that we have to make. And I personally am very unhappy with the way that it is actually being presented. It's being presented in, I think, a very one-sided and imbalanced fashion. And while I don't think media bashing gets you very far, I would say that there is maybe something that certainly could be rectified in a lot of the media coverage. We're being told that this is a referendum all about equality, that it's all about saying I do, and that it has nothing to do with children. So that leaves those of us who feel that in conscience we have to vote no in the lovely position that we're now somehow anti-equality. So my mother would have said, talk about being behind the door before you start. It would have been wonderful if the government had decided simply to call it the marriage referendum, because it would mean, in fact, when you go in on your ballot paper, you're being guided how to vote once it's marriage equality that's on it, because who wants to be anti-equality? We've also had the intervention of Mary McAleese, and this is from the Yes Equality website. And I have great admiration for Mary McAleese. I would have supported her for president. I think that what she and her husband achieved for the peace process was, beyond compare. But I was personally sorry that she chose to break with tradition and to actually intervene directly. I was just reading what Mary Robinson actually said about this 2 weeks after the end of Mary McAleese's term. And Mary Robinson had been invited to address the Seanad, and she was asked very many questions by the senators, and she said, you'll forgive me if I'm not too specific, that I believe it's an honourable tradition not to comment directly on Irish policy, and I have learned a huge amount from President Hillary in this regard. And of course, President Hillary was dead by that stage, but she said she would continue. So I believe that Mary McAleese was motivated by compassion. And I have no doubt but that she had the best of motives. But I'm not entirely sure that, and I don't say this in any way in a patronising way, or in a way that assumes that I know better than a constitutional lawyer and a canon lawyer, but I don't think she has thought through the implications of what she is actually saying. Because she's saying that it's about Ireland's gay children and about their future, and about the kind of future we want for Ireland. And I just wonder, have people who are voting yes thought about the fact that there will be gay children in the future who won't have what the vast majority of gay children have now, which is a mother and a father? And have they thought through the implications of the fact that we're not changing a law, we're changing the Constitution. We're changing Article 41, which is not titled marriage, it's titled the family. And it talks about the basic and fundamental unit group in society. So if we change that, we're not just changing marriage, we're changing the whole definition of family. And we're changing the whole definition of parenting. And another thing that I'm very, very unhappy about is the Children and Family Relationships Bill, which has been rushed through the Dáil with indecent speed. There was a bill on animal health and welfare that took 13 months to go through the Dáil from start to finish, and every single line was debated and amendments were accepted, and virtually no amendments were accepted on this one, except things that the Minister for Justice wanted changed herself. And it is a hugely far-reaching piece of legislation. I'm going to talk about it a little bit more in a minute. We're being told not only is this about marriage equality, but it's a referendum on gay people, whether we like gay people or not. And this is a briefing note from Amnesty International, which, as many of you know, was set up by Sean McBride to look after prisoners of conscience and has branched out enormously since then. And it's saying that everyone has the right to be free from discrimination in the enjoyment of their human rights, including the right to marry and found a family. So the very people who are telling us that it has absolutely nothing to do with children are telling us it's about the right to found a family. And the only reason for denying civil marriage to same-sex couples is negative attitudes and beliefs around sexual orientation and gender identity. Sometimes these are prejudices that are deeply entrenched. They fuel other human rights violations against LGBTI people around the world. So now not only are we anti-equality, we are also responsible for abuse of gay and lesbian and transgender people around the world. So if you're feeling slightly stacked against, you probably have the exact right impression of what is being presented. So it's being presented as a referendum as to whether we care about gay people or whether we're homophobic. And I think that is grossly unfair. Marriage was never about equality. Marriage was always about a particular complementarity between men and women, a particular complementarity which is the only relationship which can actually bring new life into the world. And as I have said before, two men can love each other. I completely accept that. I accept the fact that two men can love a child. I have no difficulty with that. But I do have a difficulty with the fact that neither of them can provide that child with a mother. And is this? I think I'm getting beeping from the battery. Neither of them can provide a child with a mother. But that child has a mother. And in the case of surrogacy, the child probably has two. The person who provided the egg and the person who carried the child. And I think that we haven't begun, because it's relatively new, the whole IVF thing is relatively new, I think we haven't really begun to explore the consequences, even though there are people who are already coming forward and saying, hang on a minute. There we go. Hang on a minute. This is not as simple as it looks. Now, I know everybody here is not Catholic, but I'm not presenting Pope Francis because he's a Catholic. I'm presenting him because he is someone, I think, that has great moral authority. And as he said himself, if a person is gay and he searches for the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge him? My personal involvement in this referendum is not because I am anti-gay or because I don't believe in love or I don't believe in equality. It's because I'm really concerned, just as Mary McAleese is, about the future of our country, the future of all our children, gay and straight alike, and about genuine care for other people. And I think that we have to, at all times, be temperate in the way that we deal with this and in our responses, even when sometimes it can be very difficult to receive a huge amount of abuse or a huge amount of attacks. I think we have to bear in mind that we, in a sense, keep our heads up and keep going. This is a young woman. Her name is Heather Barwick. If you want to leave the lovely part of the world that is Killarney and Kerry and the environs and come up to Dublin on April 25th. She's actually speaking in Dublin. She was raised by two gay moms. It's really worth Googling the full open letter that she wrote. It says, "Dear gay community, your kids are hurting." And this is just one quote from it. "I loved my mom's partner," that's her mom's lesbian partner, "but another mom could never have replaced the father that I lost." So increasingly, we're seeing people who have had the experience of growing up with two same-sex parents. And Heather Barwick, I like particularly because she says, "I love my mom to death. She was a brilliant mother. I loved my mother's partner." So I please don't tell me that I am anti-gay. She talks about being on the gay pride marches and feeling the hatred and feeling, you know, how unfair it was. And she still has reached a stage, at this stage of her life, she's when she got married in her 20s and she had kids, she suddenly came, she said, as she says herself, and I think she's being deliberately ironic, she came out of the closet. She had been happily presenting at conferences as the ideal child, you know, the perfect child. This is all wonderful, this is all fantastic. But in her letter, she talks about the deep ache that she had inside her for a dad, and how that was denied. And I think that we're going to hear more and more of these stories. Unfortunately, we may not hear more and more of these stories in our mainstream media. But one of the great things about the internet, there are lots of downsides. One of the great things about the internet is you can go straight to the source. You can read them for yourself. So if we're going to redefine marriage, we're being told it's not being redefined. Maybe we should look at what it is before we decide to change it. And I don't know about you. I'm not anti-politician, but whenever I hear the government saying this is just a tiny little change and it won't hurt a bit and it will have no impact, I think of two little words: Irish water, or bank guarantee, or we could go on, couldn't we? Health service. They're asking us to take on faith that this is all innocent and that it's going to have no long-term implications, at the same time as they pushed through really radical legislation in a matter of weeks, when the Animal Health and Welfare Bill took well over a year from start to finish. And I would doubt their bona fides in this. And the reason that the symbols are there is that because from time immemorial, marriage is a heck of a lot older than the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church doesn't own marriage. Marriage came about because, as Bertrand Russell said, because of children. Bertrand Russell was the great atheist philosopher. But for children, there would be no need of any institution concerned with sex. It is through children alone that sexual relations become of importance to society and worthy to be taken cognizance of by a legal institution. So it was crystal clear to Bertrand Russell. We're being told that there is a human right to marry. Now, the fact is there is no human right to same-sex marriage, because the human right to marry was founded on the idea of protecting children, ensuring that the two people who brought them into the world were most likely to be the two people who would bring them up. And obviously, this is not a comment on anybody who was raised in different circumstances. I have people in my very close family who are lone parents. I have 3 nephews who are children of lone parents. So, and if you want to suggest that there is anything wrong with the way they're being reared, I'll talk to you outside. Or as one TD suggested, that I was actually saying I was attacking widows by saying that children should have a mum and a dad. Now, I haven't met a widow yet, except in fiction, that was thrilled at her loss. So the idea that something that is a tragic loss should be seen as exactly the same as people choosing to deliberately deprive somebody of a mum or a dad, I think is deliberately twisting what we're saying. This big long rigmarole of a thing that you have up here, I can boil it down into a very simple thing. The highest body that looks at human rights in our country is the European Court of Human Rights. And in the last couple of judgments, they have said expressly that that Article 12 of the Convention on Human Rights enshrines traditional marriage between a man and a woman. Countries can choose to legislate for it if they wish, but there is no obligation to do so. And they say there is nothing approaching a consensus on this, even in Europe. And we're being told constantly, you know, we'll disgrace ourselves that if we vote no. They haven't mentioned to you at all, the fact that anywhere they have had a chance to vote, they have voted no. So in fact, if we vote yes, we'll be out of step and we'll be the laughingstock of Europe, which is we're constantly being told we are anyway, so we may as well enjoy it. And this idea that marriage is not about children, this is research which was done by the lesbian and gay community themselves, LGBT diversity, probably with a lump of money from Atlantic Philanthropies, but that's another whole day's work. And they were looking at people who are currently parenting and people who intend to parent. And in the research, it says the top-ranking legal change that would have an impact on LGBT parents is access to civil marriage for same-sex couples. And that they also go on to say that at the moment, most people who are parenting in the gay community, it's because of children from previous relationships. So somebody who was previously in a heterosexual relationship and then has a same-sex partner. But that in the future it will be more planned, and that in the case of lesbians it would be through donor sperm, and in the case of gay men it would be adoption. fostering and surrogacy, and what they called a sizable minority. Now, the research has small numbers, because the fact is there are very, very small numbers of gay people actually parenting in the country. But it's very clear, two things are very clear which emerge from it. They see the right to marry intrinsically tied up with children, and they plan that it should be absolutely the same whether children are brought into the world by the people who intend to raise them, or whether they'll be brought into the world through other means. And this is not, again, anti-gay. I would oppose this. I'm not anti-IVF in the case of people using their own gametes, but I would be against donor conception. In any case, I was hugely influenced by a woman called Dr. Joanna Rose. And again, I would urge you to Google her. There are fantastic videos on the web, Dr. Joanna Rose. She forced the British government to end anonymous donor conception, herself and her brother, on their own, basically, through tenacity. But she says that that would have been just the first step. They were born into a straight family with a mum and a dad, but, Joanna Rose discovered at 8 that she'd been donor conceived. And it actually shattered her life, because her family's Jewish, but they had run out of Jewish donors by the time she came along, and she doesn't know what her ethnicity is or what her background is, because she can't find out who her father is. She may have between 200 and 300 siblings. Between 200 and 300 siblings. We're being told that none of this will happen, and I don't want to go in great detail to the bill. We might answer questions about it later, but there is absolutely no guarantees, because we're trusting sperm banks and we're trusting the fertility industry to basically to regulate. And they're saying they will put limits on how many you can donate to, but most of the sperm in the world comes from Denmark. So with the international travel, even if they limit donation to 2 or 3 families in Ireland, which is very unlikely, it's much more likely to be 6, you can travel and you can meet up with somebody who's your half-brother, your half-sister. Or you can be like Joanna Rose, walking down the street, looking at someone and thinking, she looks like me. I wonder if she related to me. And the government thinks that if you give people the right at the age of 18 to discover who their parents are, that makes all of that okay. I don't think that. So, according to the people who want to change it, marriage is primarily about love. And I don't disagree with them. I'm a bit partial to love myself. Kind of like it. Kind of think it's important in marriage. You know, love and marriage go together like the horse and carriage. So I don't disagree with that. And it being the ultimate expression of love and commitment to two people. Yeah, I don't disagree with that either. But I think what is missing is the fact that when it is love between a man and a woman, it has this unique potential to bring the next generation into the world. And humans are extraordinarily helpless for an awfully long time. I'm from a farm, and you'd see a calf drop to the ground and get up and stagger around after a couple of minutes, and, you know, it unfortunately doesn't work that way with human babies. So they need care for a long period of time. It is in their interests. And it's not just about any old mum and dad. It's about your own mum and dad. You know, Irish people are very funny about this. My mother-in-law, Lord have mercy on her, used to look at every baby as he or she arrived and declare absolutely a Conroy. That was her side of the family. Whereas my mother would look at the child and say, oh God, the cut of the O'Briens. And they were probably both right. But whatever my children are, they're half Conroy and they're half O'Brien. And to know who they are, they need to look at the weirdness on both sides of the family and try and figure out who to blame. And I think we're all the same. And I think Irish people emigrate a lot. And when we're away, we look back and we're very clear about just how important our families are to us. So I think, yes, marriage is about love, and let's keep it about love, but it's also a child-centred institution. And it recognises a couple of things that I think are important. It recognises that men and women are different. Now, that might sound like a startling glimpse of the blindingly obvious. But we're going into a situation where we're being told the difference between the genders is not important, except when we want to get people into the Dáil, or into the boardroom, or into business, or into media slots. Then it's absolutely vital we have 50-50 representation of men and women. But the only institution we have so far that has absolutely 50% representation of men and women, marriage, gender doesn't matter. And gender doesn't matter to kids. It's all about love. So it doesn't matter if your mammy is there to cuddle you or your daddy's there to throw you up in the air or vice versa or whatever way it may be, all you need is love. Children absolutely do need love, but they need a lot more than that. Marriage recognises that only men and women can produce a child together, because in a same-sex marriage, if you want to have children, which as the research shows that a significant minority do want to, you have to involve other parties. And you are denying them the right to be parents. So if you have a surrogate mother and you have a donor egg, and you know, I was reading this incredibly offensive stuff about how they choose surrogate mothers. They like placid women to be surrogates. Placid, motherly types, calm. Whereas they like Ivy League university students with long legs and very high IQs to donate the egg. So the sexism involved in this is just incredible. And I would personally have liked to have asked Mary McAleese as a feminist, what does she think about using women as wombs? Because I think that is another consequence. It becomes normalised. It recognises that the role of men and women as mothers and fathers are complementary, and that they add to the common good. Because, I'm sorry lads, I think I'm the equal of any of you, but I don't think I'm the same. I think men and women are different, they bring different things, and that's why we are asking. My son was, for equal representation, my son was at a fantastic thing where they were talking about gender balance in Dublin Castle, and there was a woman from the army talking about how having women in the army really changed things, and a woman from the boardroom saying it, but somehow it doesn't matter when it comes to marriage, it's all the same. And only a man and a woman can give a child a mother and a father. So I think what we're being asked, we're being presented with a choice. And in order, and I will leave Paddy, God bless him, to speak on this because he's far more qualified than I am, but we're being told that it's absolutely necessary for equality that people have this. What about the equality of children? What about the equal right of children not to be brought into the world deliberately, or as an inevitable consequence that they won't have a mother and a father? And you hear all these kind of objections. Sure, there's loads of people who marry who don't have children. And the classic one is, what about the elderly couple? You're saying they're not really married because they can't have children. But there's one big difference between an elderly person and people of the same gender. One is that an elderly person marrying another elderly person, even though they can't have children, it actually doesn't deprive anybody of a mother and father. It doesn't actually change anything for a single child. And if two people who are infertile marry, generally speaking, they are not happy about it, and they do everything they can to overcome it. They don't see it as something that is just ho-hum, that can't happen. But the fact that they are infertile, which might be a personal tragedy for them, doesn't deprive a single child of a mother and a father. But if we change marriage, it will. This is, it's a little bit small there, but just it's a woman called Linda Nielsen, Nielsen, and she has this lovely phrase, the well-fathered daughter. You know, I think we quite often underestimate how important dads and granddads are to young people. I'm a teacher, I teach teenage girls, and you know, when you see how shattered those girls are when a beloved granddad, you know, passes on, or a beloved grandma. So the well-fathered daughter is much more likely to be able to look after herself and to achieve getting respect from people. She's not going to fall into difficulty. That's the point of the Linda Nielsen one. And now this one I think is a kind of a bit ironic. I'm going to ask you to guess who this is from. There is widening recognition that children can benefit from their father's active involvement in their care and upbringing. Research has shown that a good relationship between fathers and their children, particularly in their early and pre-teenage years, is associated with a range of social, educational and psychological benefits. Okay, who said it? Not too bad. I'll give you 2 points. Maybe 5. Okay, we'll give you 5 out of 10. No, you're miles off. No, it wasn't Colin O'Gorman. What it was Bernardo's, Fergus Finlay. Yeah. For example, the children of actively involved fathers benefit from enhanced social skills, they experience fewer emotional and behavioural difficulties in adolescence, their achievement at school improves, and they have a lower likelihood of getting in trouble with the law. And it's called the DA Project. And it was designed to get young men actively involved with their families because it was so important for children that young men be actively involved with their families. And yet the very same people are turning around and says, it doesn't matter at Thráneen if there's a dad in the family, so long as there is love. It's inconsistent, putting it mildly. That's a nice word for it, isn't it? Inconsistent. We have a situation like Elton John, who said that it would break his son's heart to realise that he hadn't got a mother. And he said this immediately before he went off and had another child with a surrogate mother. And the reason that he did so was he was denied the right to adopt. He wanted to adopt a 2-year-old, and he was too old. He was too old to adopt, and so was his partner. So they went to a surrogate mother because they could afford it. And I'm quite sure they love their children. I'm not saying they don't love their children. But it was funny how he reacted, when Dolce & Gabbana, do you remember that scandal? How he reacted to them and decided he was going to boycott them because they objected to people going off. And I don't like the terms that Dolce & Gabbana use, this idea of synthetic children. No child is synthetic. Every child is precious. But just the sentiment that they were trying to get across, that children need their mothers, I think was an important one. In sperm and egg donation, there's absolutely no procedure similar to adoption. And I think adoption is a fantastic thing. I have 2 sets of cousins on one side of the family that, the family entirely consists of adopted people. And I think it's a fantastic thing. But people have to jump through hoops, and they have to prove that they're ready, and they have to take into account that the children will quite possibly feel strong feelings of loss. But if you can afford to get into IVF, and it's very expensive. I was sitting beside a doctor on a programme, and he said to me quite crossly, he said, he said, the government never consulted the fertility industry before they did this. And I was saying to myself, I hope he uses the word fertility industry on air. I really hope he says industry on air, because that's what it is. It's an industry. It's a booming business. People who are in favour of yes votes say that the difference between the sexes isn't important enough to merit a special and distinct social institution. So basically, they say we're not changing it, but we're changing it entirely. We're taking away the man-woman aspect of it. And if that's not changing it, I don't know what is. They say that children just need loving parents, not mothers and fathers. But what about the fact that your mother gives you half your identity and your father gives you the other half, and your extended family? I don't know what you're like in Kerry, but in Waterford, where I come from, it's always like, and who's he now? And who would he be related to? And sure, I know them, because we're fascinated by it. We're fascinated by it. And it's at times of terrible tragedy that we see the value of it. When you look at that awful incident involving Karen Buckley and the terrible tragedies from that family, and you see the neighbours rallying around and going in and taking care of the farm, and you see the students joining together and setting up a GoFundMe, you see the benefit of close-knit, tight-knit communities. Now, we can also be a bit too close-knit for our own good and a bit too interested in each other's business, but there's a very positive side to it. So we're willing, and this is a point that Heather Barwick, the young woman I talked about earlier, who was raised by 2 gay moms, makes. She said, adopted children are allowed to say, I love you, mum and dad, and I'm so glad you adopted me, but I feel a loss. And she said, children of divorce are allowed to say, look, I still love both of you, but I am really sorry that you've broken up. But children who are children of gay parents, unless they stick with the script, will not be appearing, I don't think, on the Brendan O'Connor show. And gay marriage will normalise the idea that there's no loss involved for children who are commissioned by parents. That there's no loss at all. It's all the same so long as they're loved. This one I particularly dislike, being told that I am a racist. I'm exactly the same, that if I had lived in Alabama, I'd have been against black men and black women being able to marry white men and white women. Now, those laws existed at a very particular time, and they were an interference in what would happen, inevitably, if people were allowed to marry, which is that they would have children. But the thing that Alabama and a lot of the rest of the United States couldn't stomach was the idea of mixed-race children. Because they recognised that if you put a man and a woman together in marriage, you will have children. So it was about something hideous and racist. And I think to compare that to something, developing an institution which has never existed, which has long-term consequences for children, and to compare them and to say that you're equivalent to a racist, I think that's just an insult. Because the difference between one skin and another is completely beside the point when it comes to marriage. But the difference between men and women is not beside the point. And this one, being called a homophobe, I had the great joy of being informed that I was one of the few homophobes left in the country. Rory O'Neill, Panty Bliss, was on the programme, and he said it was great to be gay in Ireland, and that, you know, things had changed so much, he said, but there's only a few people still left, you know, who are mean to gay people. And Brendan O'Connor, God bless him, said, and who would they be? And he said, Breda O'Brien. And instead of saying, no, I don't think that's fair, Panty Bliss went on to name John Waters, and Brendan O'Connor looked thoughtful and said, well, now, I don't think John Waters is a homophobe. So there I was dangling in the homophobic breeze, and I was supposed to be delighted at this event and to think that this was just fantastic. And the irony of it was, if you go back and look at the article that I wrote that got me branded a homophobe, it's actually funny, features Mary McAleese. Because Mary McAleese had said there was a giant dancing elephant in the room, that so many priests were gay. And I had said, what does it matter a damn if every priest in the country is gay, so long as he's faithful and he's doing a good job? And that got me branded a homophobe. Someone who hates and has a fear, an irrational fear of gay people. That's what got me branded a homophobe. Now, that was very painful. I'm joking about it now, but it was very, very painful, because I'm a teacher and I teach girls who are lesbian. And the idea that I would hate them, you know, the damage that that would do to them at a very fragile time in their existence. It's not, you know, I would be close to many of my students. And it was also a terrible time for my family. But in the future, if we pass this, anybody who says there's anything wrong with gay marriage, it'll be perfectly legitimate to call them a homophobe. And Kenny has promised us that we'll be teaching it in our schools. Someone from LGBT Noise suggested that we should be teaching 5-year-olds in creches about gay relationships. So why don't we teach them about divorce while we're at it? Do you know, forget the Lego, forget the drawing, forget the colouring. Let's introduce all the adult world at the age of 5. You're going to be told that there are all these studies. I love this one. This one came from Australia. It says that kids of gay parents are happier and healthier. So there you are. We've all been failing all these years. The trouble with the study is it was people who are gay themselves telling us that their children are healthier and happier. They were reported subjectively by gay parents, and they didn't allow for factors such as that the average gay parent in Australia is far better off. That is probably not true in Ireland, but it's true there. Okay, so what we have had, the Children and Family Relations Bill, I maybe won't go through this because I think I'm running over my time a little bit, but this is a point that John Waters makes, and I will deal with this one. We can talk about this. John Waters has a very interesting take on this because he says he's agnostic about gay marriage. He doesn't really know what he thinks about, you know, two gay people actually marrying each other. But his point is the marital family in the Irish Constitution has very strong rights. So if you have a situation where you have a previous heterosexual relationship between a man and a woman, not a marital one, and children arrive out of that, and then you have a second relationship between two women who are married and who are under the protection of the Constitution, what is the situation going to be vis-à-vis the father? Because unmarried fathers have quite weak rights as it is. And he just says, this, you know, you're going to create cases for the family courts for generations to come. Just a couple of final points. We've been told you can't have a conscience clause because that would be like giving racists a conscience clause. There was a lovely man on the radio the other day talking, he was a Quaker, and Cathal McQuilla said to him, why are you raising this now? It's impossible to do anything about it. It's impossible to bring in legislation because there's a referendum going on. They managed to ram through the Children and Family Relationships Bill in about 6 weeks. Should be no bother to them at all to bring in a conscience clause if they wanted to. And you got this. The first one here you may not be familiar with. These are friends of mine who ran a printers in Dublin. And they do beautiful stationery for weddings. That's what they do. And they had done invitations for civil partnerships. They had gay people working in the store. They were very happy. But they sublet part of the display space, and somebody wanted to sell, you know, the little wedding cake toppers, except it was 2 men and 2 women. And Paul, who's my friend, is a very gentle individual, and he said, look, I'm just really not happy with that. He said, I'm very happy to continue the commercial relationship. You're very welcome to the space, but that is, you know, it's a step too far from me. And the person went straight to the gay community news, and they mounted a boycott and an assault on them, and they ended up selling their business. It just wasn't worth it. And it's been reopened with a giant rainbow flag. So there is equality for you. You can't decide what you're going to sell in your own business. Ash's Bakery, you're all familiar with that? The one in the north. Indiana, Memories Pizza. The O'Connor family, I wonder where they came from originally. Sitting in their pizzeria, a small little family business, there was a religious freedom bill being introduced in Indiana. A reporter comes and sticks a microphone under their noses and said, you know, would you cater for a gay wedding? Now, I don't know what kind of weddings you go to, but I've never been at a wedding where they serve pizza. But anyway, so they said, no, we'd be happy to serve anybody in our restaurant, but no, I don't think we would. And then they had to close down because they got death threats. The police were sitting outside their door. People were pranking them, ringing in orders and trying to basically make them go bankrupt, because they said about a totally hypothetical situation. It wasn't that a gay couple arrived in and said, can we have 30 pizzas for our wedding? It was a reporter. So these kind of things are going to be more and more common. And the government has said there will be no protection, because there's no need to have any protection, because this is just about equality. So people who are running small businesses won't have the same protections. So I'm going to end up with himself as, you know, the idea that these are difficult times, and they're going to get worse, because there are going to be lots and lots of these issues coming down the line, and each time we will be told that they're reality, and we have to cater for reality. And we will have lovely things like our dear Enda saying to us that it's all about saying I do. Now, people say I do, same-sex couples in civil partnerships every week in this country. Every week. They stand up in front of their friends and neighbours and they commit to that person. And I don't think Enda has heard that, even though they came in 2011. There are lots of other very good speakers, and we will have time for questions and answers. But wherever you're sitting at the moment in relation to it, I hope I have given you some things to think about. And thank you very much for your attention.